Family law. Some important questions that are addressed in family law include the terms and parameters of marriage, the status of children, and the succession of property from one generation to another. Family law represents a delicate balance between the interests of society and the protection of individual rights in nearly every case. In the 20th centuries, the use of dowries, an amount of money or property given to the husband with the bride in compensation for her dependency, has been practiced in many countries, but has tended to disappear in many industrial societies. Today, modern marriage is generally characterized as a voluntary union between a man and a woman, although there are still vestiges of the arranged marriage which once flourished in Eastern Europe and America. The legal transfer of the dependency from father to groom was the usual practice in marriages before modern times. As a guardian, a man usually assumed control over all of his wife's affairs. Muslim women had considerable control over their own personal property. For example, the emancipation of women in the 19th and 20th centuries dramatically changed marriage, especially in relation to property and economic status. By the mid-20th century, most Western countries had enacted laws establishing equality between husbands and wives. Modern systems recognize a mutual request for divorce, though many require an attempt to reconcile before granting the divorce order. Exceptional circumstances in which blatant neglect, abuse, or incapacity can be demonstrated can be resolved in civil court. Many systems favor special family courts that try to deal more fairly with sensitive issues, such as child custody. Throughout the early 21st century, family law and the notion of family itself were further complicated by calls for the acceptance of gay marriage and non-traditional families. In many older systems, a divorce could be done without notice if one party gave the other party notice. In many modern systems, divorce can be granted on mutual request by both parties. The couple itself can best decide if its marriage is viable, since it is the couple itself that can best decide whether it is viable. At child abuse, the family law intervenes more in private life with regard to children than in any other field. Compulsory education is a law that gives parents more authority. Society has a responsibility to protect children's best interests according to legislation on child labor and child abuse. The succession of family interests after the death of its members can be considered a part of family law. There are also laws that recognize family claims in the event that property is left in the state without a will to determine its distribution. The will may specify the wishes of the deceased, but a surviving spouse or offspring may challenge the provisions. The law recognizes family claims when a family member dies without leaving a will. If the deceased leaves no will or testament to determine how his or her estate will be distributed, but the surviving spouse and children may contest what appears to be an unfair or inequitable distribution. Conjugal family. A conjugal family only includes spouses and unmarried children who are not of age. Some sociologists differentiate between conjugal families, which are relatively independent of the kindred of the parents, and nuclear families, which maintain relatively close ties with their kindred. Other family structures have begun to challenge the normality of the nuclear family. For example, blended families with single parents and domestic partnerships. Degrees of kinship. A first-degree relative is someone who shares 50% of your genes through direct inheritance. The degree of relationship is determined by counting up generations to the first common ancestor and back down to the target individual, which is used for various genealogy and legal purposes. Nuclear family. The nuclear family uses highly descriptive kinship terms identifying only the husband, wife, mother, father, son, daughter, brother, and sister. All relatives are grouped together. Members of a nuclear family may be lineal or collateral. Non-linear family structure includes a spouse, step-parent, sibling, and child that is not a biological parent. A step-sibling is a child of a parent who is not the biological parent. It is the spouse of a parent who is not the biological parent of the child. A stepsister is a stepsirle with whom the subject has only one biological parent. Collateral relatives, one generation more distant from a common ancestor. On one side, corresponding terms come into play for relatives with one additional removal. In traditional terms, These terms do not distinguish between a collateral relative and a person married to a central relative. There are cousins with additional removal on each side. This is the most prestigious term and can be distinguished by degrees of collaterality and generational removal. Adding another great to each additional generation is what the prefix becomes for the great. Degrees of collaterality and removals are used to describe the relationship between cousins more precisely. The subject and the relative are cousins. The degree of removal is the number of generations after the common ancestor before a parent of one of the cousins is found. The degree of reduction is the number or generations from each cousin to the common antecedent. The number of generations is the degree of preservation. Matrilineal, a form of kinship in which an individual's family affiliation derives from and is traced through his or her mother's lineage. It may correlate with a societal system in which each person is associated with their mother's family tree, and which can involve the inheritance of property and titles. A matriline is a line of descent from a female to a male descendant in which the individuals in all the intervening generations are mothers. In a matrilineal descent system, an individual is considered to belong to the same descent group as her mother. The nuclear family in industrial society, it sees family structures of the past as superior to those of today, and family structures as more stable and happier at a time when they did not have to contend with problems such as illegitimate children and divorce. Other conditions that are considered characteristic of modern times have also existed in the past. They said that there is no golden age of the family in the past. Generally, modern society views the nuclear family as a haven from the world that provides absolute fulfillment. It is a place of love and trust where people can escape from the competition of dehumanizing forces. Elder abuse. Elder abuse is a single or repeated act or lack of appropriate action in any relationship where there is an expectation of trust which causes harm or distress to an older person. Many forms of elder abuse are recognized as types of family violence or domestic violence. Laws protecting the elderly from abuse are similar and related to laws protecting dependent adults from abuse. The underlying cause of elder abuse is the expectation of trust from the older person in their abuser. It includes harms by people the older person knows or has a relationship with, such as a spouse, a family member, a friend, or a neighbor, or the people the elderly person relies on for services. Forced and child marriage. A forced marriage is a marriage where one or both of the participants are married without their free will. Child marriages are often arranged between the families of the future bride and groom, sometimes as soon as the girl's birth occurs, as the social norms of many cultures dictate that one should never oppose the desire of one's parents or relatives in regard to the choice of a spouse. The line between forced marriage and consensual marriage may become blurred. It was common throughout history, but is now being condemned by international human rights organizations. The concept of family honor, an abstract concept involving the perceived quality of worthiness and respectability that affects the social standing and the self-evaluation of a group of related people. In extreme cases, individuals who engage in acts deemed to tarnish the reputation of the family may result in criminal offenses. Honor killing is the murder of a member of a family or social group by other members due to the perpetrator's belief that the victim has brought shame or dishonor upon the family or group. Being in a relationship that is disapproved by their relatives, having sex outside of marriage, dressing in ways that are deemed inappropriate, and engaging in homosexual relations are some of the reasons why people refuse to enter into an arranged marriage. The conduct of family members reflects upon the family and how the family sees itself. In a culture of family honor, keeping family tradition is often viewed as more important than individual freedom or individual achievement. Property regimes and taxation. There are some states that recognize common law marriage or de facto relationships for this purpose. Different rules exist for married couples. In many countries, each marriage partner has the choice of keeping his or her property separate or combining it. When the marriage ends by divorce, each spouse owns half of the property. In the absence of a will or trust, property is generally inherited by the surviving spouse. Examples of this include the ability for spouses to average their combined incomes. In some jurisdictions, There is also a civil partnership option or domestic partnership. The family and social justice. They argue that the personal is political, and that there are strong connections between personal experiences and larger social and political structures. Feminists have argued that the reluctance in law or practice of the state to intervene and offer protection to women who have been abused within the family is a violation of women's human rights and is the result of an ideology which places family relations outside the state. Thank you for watching. Do subscribe, like, and share.